morning. We will deal with the EEG, electroencephalography, as a practical, virtual practical. And I would give you the details of recording. So these are the definitions of electroencephalogram EEG, recording, interpretation, both of the electrical activity of the brain, particularly recorded by at least 2 scalp electrodes, the amplifier, then a tracing is recorded on suitable recording device. Usually maybe a cathode ray oscilloscope or a paper writing machine. So the recording is from the scalp electrodes. We call it electroencephalogram or EEG. And if at all you manage to record from the pale surface of the brain, then it is called electrocorticogram, a cerebral cortex. So originally this was studied and observed by Hans Berger. So it is also called Berger's rhythm. Berger's rhythm. So this is the how the EEG is produced. Essentially, it is a rhythmically discharging potential from the cell bodies, which are in the superficial layers of the cortical gray matter. And then these are graded potentials, which are summated post-synaptic potential of the brain neurons. So these can be, the summation may be from the potentials which are inhibitory or excitatory. So the product, the graded potential produced will depend upon the summation between the negative activity and the positive activity. While the action potential is produced in the axon. Okay. Usually, EEG is recorded with the eyes closed and the subject is physically relaxed. That means he would try to relax the muscles, skeletal muscles. And then he also should be mentally relaxed without any mental activity. So this is the Berger, Hans Berger, and the kind of typical presentation of the various ways of the EEG, alpha, beta, theta, and delta. We will deal with in more detail a little bit later. So as I said earlier, two electrodes are necessary. Just like you need to record in between 2 electrodes, even in the ECG, electrocardiogram also. So here also is the similar thing, but one thing, the signal is much less in the case of EEG. It is recorded in terms of microwaves. So it has to be amplified suitably. So, and again, amplification is a differential amplification, which means that the output is achieved by using the 2 inputs of the 2 electrodes. So let's see if this is the output of one of them, and this is the output of the other. And they are almost similar, except this red part. So when you call differential amplification, this blue part is cancelled out. Only you get the difference. So you can see here you see a flat line, and here is the delay. This is the difference. So that's what the differential amplifier is doing in the case of regarding the EEG. We use another term called montage. Montage refers to the particular combination of electrodes examining at a particular point of time. So this combination is in between two electrodes, and it is recording EEG at a given time. And so this setup is called as the montage. So when a single reference point is used for electrodes, all electrodes, then we call them referential montage. So there is a reference point which is common for all the electrodes. Then we call that referential montage. And another is the bipolar montage, where the reference points could be severed. And several reference points are used for recording. So then you call it the bipolar montage. That means here reference point is the same, and here there is no such reference point. Bipolar montage, the electrodes form a chain passing side by side or front to back, which I will show you. So if you see, all of them are connected to a point somewhere here. Okay, so this is referential montage. This is differential montage, and this is from front to back, and this is horizontal. This is also looking like a chain. You can also compared to this. This is essentially looking like a chain. This is what we meant earlier. Here, the same passes side by side of front to back. Now, some of the standards used. There are 21 electrodes used in the so-called 1020 system. Sensitivity is in microvolts, 5 to 10 microvolts per millimeter. And taper speed is usually 3 centimeters per second. So it can be increased or decreased. So it can be faster speed or slower speed. So commonly the average speed usually used is 3 centimeters per second. Length of recording 2 minutes per each montage. 30 minutes awake recording is done. Of which 10 minutes is the activation also can be done during the recording of the EEG. Hyperventilation is often used. Hyperventilation is pretty fast and deep. Then another is after this hyperventilation for 3 minutes, also what is used is 1 minute of photic stimulation. That there is a splash of light. Splash of light. So you get about 30 centimeters length of record, and with various frequencies, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 hertz. Hertz refers to per second. Wave frequency hertz. Now, we will come now to the electrode fixing application of electrodes. Using the internet and 1020 system. Now here you can see some white like material there, like a star there, and you can see device, etc. Now, the device at the tip has the metal part, which is actually the electrode proper. Now, before you apply, it is necessary to clean the area wherever you want to attach that the electrode. Then you need to use an electrode paste between the location and the electrode. Why? What is the use? It is for the purpose of reducing the resistance between the skin and the electrode surface, metal surface. Okay. If you don't use this paste, then naturally the picking up of the signal will be very good. Then after applying this paste, you can apply it, you can put the electrode over the skin and then press it in such a way that it sticks. Usually, the electrode paste also is used as a sticky material. Tape is fixed over the electrode. So, fix the electrode system. That we come to the points where the electrodes are attached. So there are some reference points. So here, at the pitch of the nose here, we will call it massion. And if you can see an elevation at the back of this curve, where you refer to it as inion. Then, in front of the earlobe, you have the auricular point, P auricular point. Okay, so now if you can see the diagram, this is the representative of the nose, and here is the representative of the inion, masion, inion here, and these are the ears or auricle, according to the auricle. Now this is the naming of various electrodes according to the placement and also the side. Now you can see something like FP1, FP2. FP refers to the prefrontal region. So here is where it is applied for the prefrontal region. So on the left and right sides. Then F refers to frontal. So these are frontal. Then these are central. Then this is T is temporal. Then P is parietal. And O is occipital. So accordingly, the names are given according to the lobes that they are picking up the activity from. One more thing. At the sagittal plane, these electrodes are called Z. They have this suffix Z. So frontal, central. Frontal, the midline. Then there is the central, the vertex, and there is the parietal, the midline, the sagittal line. Then, how we can exactly do this? We can on a circle like this, it is easy to represent. But then, to place them on this curve, there is a way that is used. If you see the sagittal plane, the central line, midline. So in the periphery, you mark the 10% at the periphery on either hand. And in between, you have the bits of 20% bits, 4 of them. 4 into 20 is 80%, this is 90%, and now 100% complete from here to here. So, you have a location that can be identified by dividing like this. Similarly, horizontal is also done in the same way. At either end, 10% which is separated are marked out, and in between, 20% bits are marked out. So now, right from the nasayan, you connect the oral point and then go back to the inion. So you get something like a circle. Now, from nasayan to the next is about 10% of this circle. And next part is the 20%, again 20%. Sorry. Now here, the main reasons are 10% each, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. 10% each here. Then you have from here, from the second point, you can have this line, and that is divided into 25% each. Then further you can see in similar way. Then if you see here, all of them can be attained from here. So the nasion, anion, then the periphery corresponding to nasion to the auricle and anion. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The nasion 1, 2, nasion 1, 2, 3. Central one, this is the second row. So these are the areas. This is CZ, and this is the second row with the final outer row. So you can see the naming of the which I have earlier mentioned. So FP1 and FP2, prefrontal. F3 and F4, frontal. C3, C4, right. O1, O2, occipital. Then F7 and A, F7 and F8, anterior temporal. And then T3 and T4. T3 is so temporal, but maybe you don't see in this particular part. Okay. And P5, 6 also are not there. A1, 2 is not shown here, oral, ear, and mastoid. Then SZ, CZ, and PZ are between these. Now, odd numbers are given to the electrodes which are on the left side. Even numbers are given to the electrodes on the right side. Then the lower part, they are closer to the central midline. So the distance between here and here is smaller as compared to here and here, or here and here. So these lower numbers are closer, particularly. And this is frontal, central, vertex, and right central. If you look at the normal EEG recorded thus, using either a cathode ray oscilloscope or a paper writing method. So in this, if the eyes are closed, you will find the waves are usually bigger. Well, depending upon the type of montage that is used, depending upon the location of the electrodes as well. Now, normally, this is done with the eyes closed, normally. Now, the waves are alpha, beta, theta, and delta. Essentially, they are classified according to the frequency and amplitude. There are two things. Right. So, the amplitude, and then the frequency. So now, you can see the normal alpha waves, which are found usually in the normal eyes closed position. Then they are very highly rhythmic. Frequency is about 8 to 13 hertz. And then another thing is that there is an increase and decrease, waxing and waning of the amplitudes. One is the frequency, and the amplitudes are bigger, and there is a waxing and waning when you find the alpha waves. And you get them nicely, particularly in occipital and temporal regions. Generally, in the front part, the frontal part, this kind of alpha wave with higher amplitude and about this frequency are not there. They are very fast and of small amplitudes in the frontal wave. So frequency is 8 to 13, voltage is 5 to 100 microvolts. Most prominent features are maximally in hospital and parietal hospital region they are formed. And you find it in the eyes closed condition, but usually. And it is also necessary that the person is mentally and physically relaxed, very well relaxed. Then you get the alpha waves very well. Now, another thing, when such a alpha waves are played, we also said that there is waxing and waning, increase and decrease in the amplitudes. Now, this is called synchronization. So, when the EEG is recorded with eyes closed and with mental physical rest, it produces periodical waxing and waning of amplitude of alpha waves. That's what you guys what is the synchronization. And this is because of the due to the influence of neighboring units of that. Now, what happens with the eyes closed and eyes open? So around here, eyes are open. Up to here, eyes are open. Then at this point, eyes are closed. So you can see the EEG is nicely converted into more of alpha waves than this kind of smaller waves with higher frequency. And then from the eyes closed position, if you want the hospital or subject to open the eyes, then you can see that the EEG is of a smaller amplitude and faster. And this is what you call the alpha block, or alerting response, or arousal response. Alerting or arousal response. That means now, suppose somebody is just has closed the eyes and relaxing, then when he is alerted, or when there is some stimulus, then he has to pay attention to the stimulus so that he can attend to any possible danger that might be coming. So this is a very useful phenomenon. The alpha block or desynchronization is a very useful phenomenon. And this is due to the reticular activating system stimulation, following sensory stimulation. And then beta waves, which you have just seen, they are frequent in normal eye open EEG. EEG waves are faster, much faster than what we have seen in the limit for the alpha waves. And the voltage is very low. So we can easily discriminate between the alpha and beta. And more found in the frontal region and the central region. So you can see here it is at more than 30 hertz. So 14 to 30 seconds, that is hertz, 14 to 30 hertz. So you can write as seconds also. The voltage is smaller. Alpha waves they can be up to 50 to 100 microvolts. Features are fast voltage, irregular, more common in the frontal region, and this happens when there is alerting and when the person is not so much relaxed. Even if he has closed eyes, it is possible that he might not have relaxed very well. Suppose you ask him to make a mental calculation, mathematical calculation. You can ask him to say, say 8 to 6. So 8 to 6. Then he will calculate mentally and produce the result. You make him do. Then you find the beta waves produced. And he's doing that. Then theta waves, here they are much bigger than the alpha waves. and the frequency is less. Frequency is less. So voltage is more 100 microvolts or more, and frequency is about 4 to 7. And then often found in the parietal and temporal regions, particularly in the children, are during early sleep. So you can see the amplitude is increasing, simultaneously the frequency is decreasing. And this is also an indication of lesser excitable state. Obviously, this kind of waves will start appearing when you are going to sleep, early sleep particularly. The normal theta is a small amount of sporadic, isolated activity found in normal awake state. You can see here. You can see here images. So prominent in drowsy and sleep EEG tracing. EEG activity is slower rate, 4 to 7 hertz, and more found in the frontal and temporal region. Then from the fourth type of wave, delta. These are even much bigger, and the frequency is even lesser than 4, 1 to 4%. You can see it is not 200 microvolts. These are usually during sleep. Can be produced by hyperventilation also. If you produce a situation where you are washing out carbon dioxide because of hyperventilation, also you can produce delta waves. In organic brain disease also, it is possible that the delta waves may be produced in the wakeful condition. So delta activity, you can see they are very large, and they last for a very longer period. So frequency is less than 4. And usually when the sleep is more deep, then you'll find this kind of delta activity. Then if you come to the usefulness, particularly the epilepsy can be identified by recording the electroencephalogram. And you have usually epilepsy is defined as a state of loss or reduced consciousness. Plus, there are also repeated movements which can be very fast or can be slow or jerky, etc. They can be variable, abnormal, simply abnormal. So we have varieties like grand mal epilepsy, petit mal epilepsy, and psychomotor epilepsy, depending upon these kind of changes. Now, in the grand mal of epilepsy, consciousness is lost, and there is no aura. Aura means the patient might have a kind of indication, like a flash of light or some abnormal sound, hearing of abnormal sounds, and a flash of light, something like that. And that can tell him that he is going to get an epileptic season very soon. So here there is no aura in the grand mal epilepsy. And what we do, consciousness is lost. And then convulsions of that, tonic muscle contractions, and clonic jerks also. You remember, tonic is muscles have gone into contraction, stay in that state for a prolonged period. Clonic and sudden jerky movement is clonic reaction. Then EEG will show very high voltage. Okay. Slow waves defeated by spike at each jerk. So you can see there is a wave and a spike here. In the grand mal epileptic thing. A wave and a spike. In the petit mal epilepsy, you which might occur usually in the children. Loss of consciousness and convulsive movements are likely to occur. The twitching movements, small twitching movements are also. So convulsive movements are usually small twitchings. EEG will produce 3 per second doublets. What is a doublet? Here you can see there is a peak and then a smoother wave. This is the doublet. And you have a large peak downwards. So you have this kind of doublet which are, and they are 3 per second rate in the predicted manner. And here children lose consciousness, of course. There can be aura also. Then this is predicted epilepsy. Psychomotor epilepsy, consciousness is cloudy. The patient doesn't know what is happening. He might be hallucinating also. Then coordinated but inappropriate movements will happen. Movements are not so abnormal, but they don't serve any purpose. And there is no typical EEG in this case. Now, can you make out how well you can make out the epileptic discharge? Yes, using the EEG. Likelihood of finding epileptic form discharges. So, if you record a single EEG within one day, you can see 50% of the discharges. If you record single EEG after 24 hours, it is reduced. The possibility is reduced. If you make a record for a period of 24 hours, then the possibility of finding them increases very well, 80 to 90%. There are also, similarly, if you make 4 or more routine EEG recordings, then the probability of finding the epileptic form discharge is very high. Now, please see this video clip, which is produced by another person.
In this video, we will review the basics of the electroencephalogram, or EEG, how it's recorded, and how the results can be used in clinical neurology. We will review several topics briefly during this video. The topics will be reviewed in further detail in subsequent videos for those interested in deeper dives into the world of EEG. We will review some of the basic terminology of EEG, how EEG is recorded, how EEG is displayed for interpretation, some common EEG patterns, and how we can use the results of EEG for making decisions in clinical neurology. First, we will start with the terminology. The system by which EEG electrodes are applied to the head and then displayed on EEG recordings is called the International 1020 system. The International 1020 system is a standard method of measuring the head and placing electrodes. It depends on 4 main positions on the head that are easily transferable between patients. First is the nasion at the bridge of the nose. then the inion, the bony prominence at the back of the head, and then two preauricular points just anterior to each ear. Consider this diagram of a head looking from the top down. The first measurement that is made is from the nasion to the inion, front to back. This measurement is then divided into 10 and 20% increments, and this is how the 10-20 system gets its name. Marks are placed, and then a measurement is made from one preauricular point to the other. Again, this is divided into 10 and 20% increments, and additional marks are made. Further marks are made around the circumference of the head, and separated by 10% increments. And then parasagittal measurements are made, separated by 25% increments. And finally, transverse measurements are made, and how the results can be used in clinical neurology. We will review several topics briefly during this video. The topics will be reviewed in further detail in subsequent videos for those interested in deeper dives into the world of EEG. We will review some of the basic terminology of EEG, how EEG is recorded, how EEG is displayed for interpretation, some common EEG patterns, and how we can use the results of EEG for making decisions in clinical neurology. First, we will start with the terminology. The system by which EEG electrodes are applied to the head and then displayed on EEG recordings is called the International 10-20 system. The International 10-20 system is a standard method of measuring the head and placing electrodes. It depends on four main positions on the head that are easily transferable between patients. First is the nasion at the bridge of the nose, then the inion, the bony prominence at the back of the head, and then two preauricular points just anterior to each ear. Consider this diagram of a head looking from the top down. The first measurement that is made is from the nasion to the inion, front to back. This measurement is then divided into 10 and 20% increments, and this is how the 10-20 system gets its name. Marks are placed, and then a measurement is made from one preauricular point to the other. Again, this is divided into 10 and 20% increments, and additional marks are made. Further marks are made around the circumference of the head, and separated by 10% increments. And then parasagittal measurements are made, separated by 25% increments. And finally, transverse measurements are made. The intersections of these two lines is where the final electrodes are placed. Once all of these marks have been placed, the electrodes can be applied to the scalp of the patient. The electrodes are labeled as is shown here. The system is very simple, and each electrode is represented by letters and a number. The numbers indicate the side of the head, so that odd numbers are on the left side and even numbers are on the right. In general, lower numbers mean that the electrode is closer to the midline, so you can see here that C4 is closer to the midline than T8, and the midline itself is represented by a Z, which stands for 0. The letters are indicators of the position on the head. In this central chain of electrodes, you can see that the F stands for frontal, the C for central, and the P for parietal. EEG is recorded using the technology of the differential amplifier. The differential amplifier takes two electrical inputs and displays the output as the difference between the two inputs. This is particularly useful at recording and displaying very small electrical signals, such as those in EEG. For example, you can see these two waveforms, which are very similar, except for one small difference demonstrated here in red. When these two signals are placed through a differential amplifier, you can see that the output is simply the difference between them, and all of the other commonalities are canceled out. Another way to think about this is to think about the very common children's game that is seen on restaurant menus. You can see that the picture on the left and the picture on the right are very similar, except for a few small differences indicated here. If we were to consider the picture on the left as input 1 and the picture on the right as input 2, we could put these two quote-unquote signals through a differential amplifier, and the output would look like this. This example is a good way of thinking about EEG signals as something that is not absolute, but rather the difference between two inputs. EEG can be displayed in different ways, which are all known as montages. The most common type of montage is a bipolar montage. Here I have a picture of the head from the top down. If we display the difference between FP2 and F8 as a single tracing, it would look something like this, and we call this single tracing a channel or derivation. Next, we move posteriorly and look at the difference between F8 and T8 and display this as a different channel. We continue to move posteriorly, and we have a string of recordings from the front of the head to the back that are linked together. This string of recordings is called a chain. In this case, this is the right temporal chain. Several chains can be placed together in a single display, such as this example of an anterior-posterior bipolar montage. This anterior-posterior bipolar montage is laid out as if we are looking at the top of the head of the patient and they are facing to the right. Therefore, we first see the left temporal chain, then the left parasagittal chain, then the midline, then the right parasagittal chain, and then the right temporal chain. At the bottom, we see a single EKG channel as well. Another common type of montage is called a common average reference montage. Here, in a single channel, rather than looking at the difference between two adjacent electrodes, as in a bipolar montage, we look at the difference between an electrode of interest and an average of the signals of the rest of the head. Here we can see the layout of an average reference montage, which is very similar, but again we are comparing each channel to an average of the rest of the head. Some relative strengths and weaknesses of different montages are reviewed in a separate video. I will briefly review some commonly encountered EEG patterns, simply to whet your appetite for further EEG learning. One of the most commonly encountered entities on an EEG recording is an eye blink, and so I will review this briefly. We have to think about the eye as a dipole with a polarity. There is the retina and the cornea. The retina is negatively charged, and the cornea is positively charged. If we think about something as simple as an eye blink, in this crude diagram, when the patient blinks their eye, the eyeball moves upward into the head, a phenomenon known as a Bell's phenomenon. This is the normal response during eye blinking. If we think about this from the perspective of the EEG electrodes closest to the eye, we can see that this upward deflection of the eye will cause a large positive signal at the frontal polar electrodes FP1 and FP2. On EEG, this results in a very large deflection in the frontal polar electrodes on both sides, indicated here. The alpha rhythm is the most commonly encountered rhythm during wakefulness. Here I have highlighted the alpha rhythm. The alpha rhythm is a normal rhythm during wakefulness and is especially prominent when the eyes are closed. Although there is a range of frequencies for the alpha rhythm, it is usually around 10 Hz or so, which is the case in this patient. Focal epileptiform discharges are generated by synchronous abnormal electrical activity in a large population of neurons in the cortex. Focal epileptiform discharges can be an indicator that the brain is capable of generating seizures and can be a helpful prognostic and diagnostic finding in patients with epilepsy. Here I have a normal awake EEG in an anterior-posterior bipolar montage. Without going into too many details, there is a focal epileptiform discharge here. You can see that this is in the left temporal chain. I will go into how to sort out the polarity of this epileptiform discharge in a separate video, but here I've indicated the areas of maximum abnormality for this particular epileptiform discharge. Here is a slightly different focal epileptiform discharge. Whereas the other discharge was maximal in the temporal region, this discharge is maximal in the posterior aspect of the head, on the right side, and I have shown its maximal field in this diagram. Generalized epileptiform discharges are seen in patients with generalized epilepsy syndromes. Here is an example of a run of generalized epileptiform discharges. You can see that these discharges involve basically the whole head all at once. There is a long run of these discharges lasting almost the entire length of this page. These are actually the typical 3 Hz generalized spike and wave discharges seen in childhood absence epilepsy. It is useful to think about the diagnostic yield of EEG. In studies of patients with epilepsy, The likelihood of finding an epileptiform discharge, either focal or generalized, in a single EEG within 24 hours of a first seizure is about 50%. If the EEG is done more than 24 hours after the first seizure, the likelihood might drop somewhat. This means that half or even more than half of patients with epilepsy might have a normal routine EEG. On prolonged 24-hour EEG recording, the likelihood of picking up some epileptiform discharges is much higher, in the range of 80 to 90%. But again, this means that 10 to 20% of the time, even prolonged EEG can be normal in a patient with epilepsy. Several routine 30 to 60-minute EEG recordings can produce the same yield as a 24-hour recording, but may be less practical. To think about why some patients with epilepsy might not have epileptiform discharges, we can consider a couple of things. Here I have shown a coronal section of a brain. I have placed the approximate position of the standard EEG electrodes on this image. The two major determinants of seeing a scalp abnormality are the area of cortex involved and the location. For example, I have shown here a star which represents a small area of cortex that has synchronous abnormal electrical activity. Because this area is small, it might not be picked up by the overlying electrodes. If a larger area is involved, such as shown here, it might be more likely that this abnormality would be picked up by scalp electrodes. In general, 10 to 20 square centimeters of cortex has to be involved in order for the abnormality to be consistently demonstrated on scalp EEG. The other main determinant of a scalp abnormality on EEG is the location of the synchronous cortical activity. In this example, I have shown a very superficial area of cortex involved, which might be more likely to be picked up by scalp EEG electrodes. If a deeper area of cortex was involved, such as in the cingulate gyrus, shown here, in the mesial temporal structure, shown here, or in the insular cortex, shown here, it may be less likely that such abnormalities would be picked up by the more distant scalp electrodes. In this video, we have reviewed basic EEG terminology, how EEG data is recorded and displayed, some common EEG patterns, and how EEG may be used in clinical neurology. Obviously, this is a very superficial review of EEG, and for further details, feel free to peruse some of the other videos which explore EEG in further depth.
Thank you very much for viewing this. I hope this has given you some clear information regarding the recording of EEG. Though the abnormalities, etc., we have to be and more detail maybe in the later future. Thank you very much. Feeling.